Welcome. This is our last actual full-blown PowerPoint slide lecture. We'll still meet 2 more times before we call it quits as a class. But this is the last prepared lecture for the semester. It's been awesome teaching you guys. It's been fun having all of you. I've really enjoyed reading through your discussion posts and your write-ups and interacting with all of you individually. It's been a fantastic semester. So thank you guys. I've enjoyed it. And that's valuable for me as a teacher. Having really good students makes my job so much more joyful. So thank you for making it joyful. Everybody online can see the PowerPoint, right? I'm sharing that screen. That's correct. Good. Okay. So for today, I suppose before we get into that, next week we'll do a movie night, and I'll send out an email about this. We'll start the group for the discussion group for it at 6:30 instead of 5, because we'll watch it here in person. And then the week after that will be a final review session, and then we're done. Okay, so for this week, we read a paper co-written by Nakamura and Csikszentmihalyi. These are 2 awesome researchers who have worked on flow for their entire career. And the reason that I chose flow and a paper from cognitive science for the lecture, What is Happiness, is because of a personal conviction. I believe that when we are in states of flow, we, as Csikszentmihalyi puts it, are in the midst of optimal human experience, when awareness and action and world and self all collide together and work together so fluidly and perfectly. That's when we feel at our best. At least this is when I felt at my best. And if we want to target what happiness is, then why not begin with this ubiquitous, because everybody has this cross-culturally, through different ages of people, old people, young people, little people, babies, right? Experience flow. It's ubiquitous, and it is directly correlated with feelings of joy, appreciation, and essentially happiness. So there's a huge literature in philosophy on happiness, and we've looked at probably one of the most boring, awful parts, which is utilitarianism, right? Where we're measuring happiness in terms of utility and then running these equations to calculate and decide what to do. We've also read Aristotle in the first book of the Nicomachean Ethics, right? Where what the argument is all about is to say, look, there's an end at which all human acts aim, and that's happiness. So rather than directly target what that end is or what it's like, which is what a lot of the philosophy is, my personal expertise as a researcher is in how that end is most optimally achieved through expertise and through flow-like activity. So that's where we begin with flow states today. Okay. So what is happiness? Well, it could be pleasure, right? Like the utilitarian says, which could be extrinsic or intrinsic. Okay, so this is an important distinction to have. An extrinsic pleasure is something like food when you're hungry, or money after the end of a terrible 2 weeks working in an Amazon warehouse or whatever, right? That the pleasure you receive is extrinsic, meaning outside of the activity that you're performing for the sake of that pleasure. Now, this is to be contrasted with an intrinsic pleasure. So an intrinsic pleasure is one for whom the activity is pleasurable in itself. So think like watching a sunset, or skiing down a mountain, or something like that, right? Being in love with someone would probably be an activity for which the pleasure is generated by the performance of the activity rather than as being extrinsic. Now, activities can abide both extrinsic and intrinsic pleasure. So say, for instance, you really love working in that Amazon warehouse. You just really enjoy having no bathroom breaks and working 12-hour days in the holiday season. It's just, rocks your socks. Okay, so you really enjoy it. So there's intrinsic pleasure in running through the shelves and picking items to fuel materialist consumption and greed and awful waste. And there's also extrinsic pleasure because you're getting paid too, right? So there's, you can have both. So happiness might just be measurable by pleasure, either extrinsic or intrinsic. We might also say that happiness is about life satisfaction. So happiness doesn't have to do with any pleasure in or out of the moment, but rather with a global judgment about what is good for us, what we like, et cetera. So we hear the phrase type 1, type 2 fun, right? Do you all have this concept of type 1 and type 2 fun? Well, if you don't, so the idea of type 1 fun, it's kind of like the extrinsic, intrinsic thing. Type 1 fun is, wow, that was really, I enjoyed doing that. It was great, right? Like skiing down a mountain or being the crazy person that enjoys a 12-hour shift at Amazon. Type 2 fun is the sort of fun that you look back on and say, that was a great time. But in the moment, you were camping in the frozen -20-degree Arctic and freezing, your extremities off. This is not fun in the moment, but you look back and you say, that was a good time. It was like built character, right? This would be type 2 fun. So we might say that, look, happiness isn't about the type 1 fun of life, but really overall the type 2, or even some sort of mixture. And that what matters to us when we're saying like, am I happy, is not like, do I feel joy right now? But rather, when I sort of look down, bird's eye view, peer over the whole of my life, can I say, yeah, all right, I got it going on. And if so, then maybe that's what happiness is. Or we could just say it's an emotional state. It's not some heady concept of an extrinsic or intrinsic pleasure measurable in terms of cash or existential, what would you put it? Existential satisfaction, nor is it some sort of holistic life judgment, but maybe happiness is just an emotional state, to each their own. Maybe I'm only happy when I feel ecstatic, when there's a bunch of dopamine and serotonin rushing through my brain, right? This sort of thing. Or maybe it's some blend, or if you've read Brave New World, you should be familiar with Soma. Maybe happiness is just neurochemical. Maybe this thing that is the end of all human activities, according to the philosopher Aristotle, right, is really just, can be reduced to a particular neurochemical makeup. And maybe we're all just to be determinists, and some of us are luckier in this neurochemical department than others. So maybe happiness is just that, having the right switches flipped in your brain. Maybe it's stoic equanimity, something different from all these others. So we've been talking about pleasure and satisfaction, about the feeling of joy, or being high on dopamine. But we might think that happiness is not any sort of elevated state or any sort of judgment in general about one's life as able to or reliable in producing elevated states, but rather is a kind of equanimity, a calm flatness, sort of meditative Zen, as you might call it, right? Sort of popular culture lingo. Maybe happiness is like that, when we don't have rising emotions in one way or the other. So really, it's probably some blend of these. And what the flow state theory that we read for today does is it blends together many of these different elements of what happiness could be into the sort of phenomenological experience, the what it's like to be in a state where we feel emotional joy, or we feel some sort of stoic equanimity, where there's a whole lot of neurochemical positivity going on, right? And to be in a flow state is not necessarily to be happy. However, it is a strong indicator, meaning that it's like strongly correlated with typically what we think of as happiness or joy. It's because flow states occur under subjective conditions. When things are just right, we get in the zone, we get in the flow, we hit our groove, right? And these subjective conditions are likewise often comorbid with states of happiness. And this is why they're likewise often called optimal experience. And so what is flow? Well, first we should look to what expertise is, because as Csikszentmihalyi, the guy who invents the term flow state, researched in his very early career, he was interested in artists and rock climbers and similar sets of characters. He was interested in experts and seeing how they did what they did and noticing how they did it so well, and the peculiar kind of commitment or lack thereof that they had to their activities. So when we talk about expertise, the way that experts act is very often at the heart of what flow is supposed to be. Now, you don't have to be an expert to get into the flow, but they are the sort of optimal class of people for whom it's possible to study such a thing like flow, because they can reliably enter into this optimal sort of experience. So in studying experts or understanding what expertise is like, we get a window into this enigmatic, beautiful, and ubiquitous state of optimal experience through flow. So what is expertise? There are typically two, well, historically, I should say, not typically, there are historically two competing views on what expertise is that we can classify as the just do it view and the cognition and action view, okay? So what's just do it? And these are supposed to be competing, by the way. So what is just do it? Well, it's popularly believed that when we are performing at our very best, we become lost in our actions. Think flow state, right? Our bodies and minds are absorbed into our surroundings as if we were one with the world around us. We lose our sense of self, of time, and of ego, finding instead an immediacy of being in joyful activity without worry beyond the afforded requirements of the task at hand. So famously in the Zen and the Art of, the first book that did that of archery, Yugen Haragul says, look, as I was learning from the Zen master how to shoot a bow, I only got it once I stopped trying to get it and allowed the bow to shoot itself. And this is when I became a perfect shot. Analogously, we can think of navigation. So that the first time you move to a new city, you don't know any of the streets, you don't know how to get around, but you know, like your end destination. So you got to look at a map or, pull up GPS on your phone. And you do this every time you need to get somewhere in this new city until you start to learn the streets, right? You start to learn the traffic patterns. And then without really thinking about it, if you see a red light or if you see some traffic, you can take a left and detour yourself. You don't need to think about it. It all just sort of happens. There's no more need for maps. There's no more need for explicit rule setting or heuristic navigation. Rather, you just can do it, right? Once you become an expert of your city, you don't need the map anymore. Now, there's also some negative stories, right? So there's negative evidence as well. It's called the Yips. Golfers and pitchers experience the Yips often. So and this is Rick Ankiel, whose career was destroyed by the Yips. It's a psychological condition where you overthink, or so it's said. You get in your own head. And if you think too hard about what you're doing as you're doing it, you whiff. And thus you suffer from the Yips. So just do it sounds great, right? Like the better you get at doing something, the better you are at performing it automatically. But turns out that experts end up thinking out a lot, especially as they're acting, right? So climbers plan routes and recognize markers for success while they're climbing. They hit the right crimp, or they adjust their foot just so, recognizing the weight their body needs to be pressed against the wall. Likewise, experts need to know when to follow rules and when to break them. So chess mastery sometimes involves changing rules, changing heuristics, that you never move your knight to the side of the board, but there might be some sort of tactic in which moving your knight to the side of the board draws out some opponent's play, or sets up your pieces in such a way as you can threaten the opponent in the future. So sometimes we need to break rules and heuristics. So you have to be cognitively present in moments where you say, okay, I would have automatically not moved my knight to the edge of the board, but when I'm thinking about it now, I realize maybe it's a better idea to change that rule. Experts likewise need heuristics to get better. Performance is an opportunity for practice, right? Even when you're acting, even when you're in the big game, you're still learning, you're always getting better, right? There's no real difference between what you do in practice and what you do in performance with respect to how well you want to act at all, how well you want to do your job. And famous general from World War I, von Moltke, says, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. The world is chaotic, it's complex. There's a lot going on in it. And when even the best laid plans, right, oft go awry. The idea is that, look, when we have these sort of habits to act, we are certainly loaded springs, but we got to be flexible and sensitive to the complex and shifting environment of our activities. And this brings us to cognition and action, the alternative competing view of expertise. So what Yarrow is saying in this quote is that automaticity is a kind of false ceiling to expertise, that when you become able to do something automatically, like say tie your shoes, you stop thinking about it, you stop getting better, and you just do as well as anybody would do at tying your shoes, but you do not become the super expert shoe tire, right? Which may not exist. But the level of the hobbyist is the one of automaticity. Really what the true expert does is they ascend beyond this level, and they engage in all sorts of complex thinking in their acting and what they do. So some evidence of this is coaching and feedback, that experts need to know what they did in order for feedback to have any sort of texture upon which to take grip. That if the coach says, look, you swung out to the left when you should have swung out to the right because these defenders were coming at you, and that's why you got nailed by the linebackers. And the quarterback says, what? I was mindless. I wasn't thinking. I have no idea what you're talking about, right? That's no good. So like coaching is an important part of getting better, becoming an expert. And if coaching is to work at all, then you better damn well be present in what you're doing as you're doing it. Likewise, so this is my favorite pianist, Vladimir Horowitz, who was awesome. Had this amazing storied career. The guy's interpretation of everything is fantastic in his own, and he breathes like new life into these classical sonatas and pieces. There, amazing. Anyway, so Horowitz retires and comes back after like a decade to play at Carnegie Hall. And he walks out on stage, sort of roaring applause, sits down at the bench, cracks his fingers, and then places them on the keyboard, or the piano. And like the fifth note, like, he flubs the fifth note of his reunion tour at the Carnegie Theater. This is like the most famous modern pianist of all time. And the story goes, you can't hear it in the recording. So there were two recordings. The original recording of this, he re-recorded over it, so the mistake wasn't there. Kind of interesting. But later, I think after he died, maybe, the original recording came out, so you can hear this now, this mistake. It's flub. But as the story goes, the moment this happens, like the fifth note, within the first like 4 beats even of his recital, when he flubs, there's this like audible from the audience, right? Just everyone loses it, but he comes back, right? And so Vladimir Horowitz, when I said his interpretations were fantastic, this is because he played the classics in his own way. And he was loved and hated for this by the critics, because a critic would say, well, this wasn't Concerto number 20. This was some strange bastardization of it, right? But his strange interpretation, his strange bastardization was also beautiful and powerful. And so what he was always able to do was bring this like soul that was his own to the music. And just as he did it to like well-composed music, he does it to his mistake, in that he flubs the fifth note, there's this, and then immediately readjusts the second phrase of the piece that he's playing to like play with the flub, and then he's back under the composition of the music and off to the races. And this is a kind of thinking on the fly, right? Like being on his toes, that he sees what he did and then immediately reacts but he says like, look, I got to like shift things around. And so he does. And this requires not being mindless and acting automatically, just moving through the composition after your finger, hit the wrong key, but deciding and thinking and realizing what needs to be done. Okay, so we might also think that cognition and action, this alternative view of expertise, goes wrong. So one reason is reports of expert phenomenology. Phenomenology, again, is like what it's like, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But this is B.B. King. I was listening to this radio interview of B.B. King, and he's being interviewed by a technical music guy who knows all of the technical music jargon for playing guitar and saying like how as he like bent the string, he's shifting around. I'm not a technical music guy, so I can't use all the jargon, but it was hard to understand. And B.B. King, it was a radio program, but like you could hear him smiling. And after this like soliloquy of jargon and technical musical content, B.B. King says, "Yeah, I didn't plan it. Like you're right, but I didn't think about it like that, right? In fact, I didn't really think about it." Adam Ondra, probably best climber in the world, says, look, sometimes I don't even remember the first 30 seconds of the route. And these are complex, challenging problems that he's climbing. But, just blacks out, or so he says. The phenomenology is as of being mindless. Likewise, sometimes there may just not be time to think, right? So there's no time to think, only to react when you're given split-second shifts, changes in the environment, when you need to react to something that you can't say, okay, here's what should I do? Here's how I do it. You got to be fast. And sometimes you got to be faster than it would take to consciously represent any sort of idea of control for action. And likewise, we might think of the fine-grainedness of actions, of habit, and of automaticity. So I might decide to do a push-up, right? But I don't decide to move all of the micro muscles in my, chest and arms and lats and stuff that allow the push-up to occur. I sort of holistically decide I'm going to perform this action, but all the little things in between are automatic and mindless. And we might think that parts of those automatic and mindless features of physical behavior are to be associated with expertise. Okay, so where does that leave us? Well, what's the relationship between conscious cognition and automaticity in skilled action? When does automaticity work for experts, and when does it act as a false ceiling? When does thinking get in the way of doing, and how do experts cope with the need to act quickly and fluidly in order to succeed? So what we're going to do is we're going to try to answer all these questions by using flow states. So flow states are a case example of this human phenomena, behavioral, phenomenological occurrence in which these questions are at least resolved in action, if not in conception. They could still be, and probably still are, curiosities, but at least in action, we seem to get this kind of in flow-like action, a kind of blending of these two historical views of expertise, cognition and action, and just do it. But before we do, we should, what's that word I've been using? Phenomenology. Should define this. So phenomenology is a philosophical tradition pioneered by Edmund Husserl and others, which endeavored to make a science out of human experience. So the idea was to say that psychological or like mental states, cognitive objects of the subjective human experience can be measured, mapped out, and like empirically isolated, like objective features of the human experience or of the world, that we can dig through and into the mind and see what lives there just in the same sort of way that you could, like an entomologist could dig through an ant hill and see all the different little places that the ants live. Right? This is Edmund Husserl, looking very imposing, a German psychologist, philosopher guy. I wonder if there are pictures of him smiling. I can't even imagine what he'd look like if he's smiling. Well, no, that's a picture. He can't do that. It's not Harry Potter. Okay, so if you'd like a brief guide on how to perform this science, please see the corresponding chart. Look at a thing, stare, look at it incessantly, gaze, watch, look for a long time, look again and again. And this is doing phenomenology. But actually, right? So the idea of phenomenology is to say that there's a what it's like, an experience as of a quality to conscious mental representation that here we are seeing the world as such, feeling it as such, having a quality, the qualitative part of experience. This is what phenomenology consists in. So we call it a what it's like, the famous contemporary paper by Thomas Nagel's What It's Like to Be a Bat, where Nagel argues that there is a what it's like to be a bat that's completely inaccessible to what it's like to be a human. And so there are just completely immeasurable, uncalculable, quantifiable features of the world and of experience. Because we don't know what it's like to echolocate, we can't do that. So every experience, whether acquired through the senses or through intellection, has particular character, quality of what it's like to be experiencing that as you do. But can anybody think of why using phenomenology as scientific datum might be challenging or controversial?
Hard to like measure what you're doing.
It's hard to measure what you're doing. And let's take the bat again for an example. That bats echolocate, and this is how they like see the world, or at least that's how we metaphorically understand it. Can any of you echolocate? Some people can, sort of. They're like blind people that do this. Like bikers in New York City will like, and like here, it's wild. They can do it. But there's more than that to being a bat, right? And we can't comprehend what it's like to be a bat. Phenomenologically speaking, at least. Does the thickness of the difference between being a bat and being a human, phenomenologically speaking, thin out enough with respect to other people? Right? When we're trying to measure what it's like to be someone else, say, phenomenologically speaking. It's way different to be a bat, but it's also kind of different to be you or you, right? It's different to be somebody else. But we probably share a lot. We're both humans, and we have the same perceptual organs that operate in statistically similar ways, right? But is that enough? If being a bat is completely different, and it's also, like tomato for humans, is that difference thin enough to bridge the gap between my phenomenological experience private to me and your phenomenological experience private to you? Maybe. Husserl certainly thought so, but not everybody does. And Nagel's argument is pretty convincing that the private phenomenological experiences can't be bridged, or at least not so far as we know yet. So Husserl just tried to make a science of phenomenology, but it existed well before that, right? So 350 years prior, Descartes used a phenomenological tool to prove his existence, to prove the fact that he could know anything at all, right? We remember this, right? Descartes, cogito, I think, ergo, therefore, sum, I am, right? This is a phenomenological account. This is a private phenomenological experience that each one of us can share in, right? That each one of us can participate in and say, oh, I think, therefore I am. And even if the veil of privacy between my phenomenological experience and anyone else's is a little too thick to be certain, at least we got some things we share, right? These like a priori internal rational qualities of argument and justification, like the cogito. We can all get there. So there are some ways that phenomenology can be used deductively as well as empirically. So we shouldn't be so skeptical. The flow state literature is by and large a practice in attempting to make phenomenological data, what it's like to have a certain kind of experience, significantly sound. We're trying to say, like, look, based on the phenomenology of this kind of action reported by all sorts of different people that were actually pointing at the same phenomena. There's actually something real, something going on. There is a feature of being human at play here, not just a private, subjective, uncalculable, unanswerable to falsifiable peer-reviewed practices, but some robust, real feature of human experience. So the flow state. Csikszentmihalyi in the 1960s gets interested in artists and his rock climbing friends. And he saw that artists would spend days foregoing food and drink and the creature comforts to complete paintings. And then when the painting was complete, after having foregone food and drink and not thought about anything else for days and weeks and hours, they would throw it in a dusty corner of their crappy little studio apartment and then begin the process again, right? Like they just stop caring about that old painting and move on to the next one. This was confounding. He wanted to know what's going on. So what he was seeing was motivation in the moment and motivation between moments and the difference between them, right? So the artists were really motivated in the moment to complete this painting, to work on it, more motivated than they were to eat and drink. And then in between these like states of incredible attention and motivation, like throw it in the corner. It's this strange, confounding incongruity. So what Csikszentmihalyi does is he begins interviewing artists to figure out what they feel like is going on so that he can get some insight into their experience. Okay, so let's look at an argument. 1, attention is a limited resource. 2, as we force ourselves to attend, we become worse at continuing to focus. For instance, there's an interesting study in this anthology called Effortless Attention, where what they would have people do is like use executively controlled attention, where they had to like force themselves to focus, right? And then they would have these people engage in social situations, and the control group would just get in the social situations. And the people who were given the executive attention task were more awkward and less comfortable in the social situations than the control, right? So like they've used up their attentional capacity and thus get tired socially. They become worse at doing other things. The more challenging an activity or task, the more attention we need to pay to it. Right? So if it requires a lot of focus, this thing we're trying to do, then we got to spend a lot of our attentional battery. Therefore, challenging activities deplete attentional resources faster than easy activities. This makes sense, right? If you're doing something hard, you got to use more fuel. If you step on the gas, you burn more gas. Similarly, we ought to be far less capable of performing challenging actions at length, right? From 2 and 4. Well, what's wrong with this argument? So remember, when we're playing this game, we can disagree with the premise, or we can say that an inference doesn't hold the glue that, 1 to 3 and 2 and 4, whatever. Any thoughts?
Maybe like not disagreeing with any of those, but just in general, you see a lot of artists or musicians who can go hours on end without like having to take a break or eat.
Excellent. So the activity and quality of flow state experience completely confounds this argument, right? So I mean, this all stands to reason, right? This is a deductive argument. It's valid. It's honestly probably even sound to a point. At least this is what our empirical data on attention and studies of attention show us. But then there's flow state and flow-like activities. Exactly. So attention and skilled action is better able to be sustained in high skill and challenging situations than in easy ones because of flow. So this argument would be right if it weren't for the flow state. So flow state involves phenomenology, again, the character of one's personal experience, what it's like to experience X. And what Csikszentmihalyi saw in these like reports on the phenomenology of flow from this artist was certain common motifs. And And later, these motifs would be reproduced in rock climbers and bikers and factory workers and many other domains. The flow state they're all over. Writers and accountants and everybody experiences or is able to at least experience the flow. So what are these motifs? One, intense focus and concentration on one's activity in the present moment. So a really high expenditure of attention. Two, a merging of action and awareness, at least in description, right? It felt like body and world were one, that here I am and there I was in third person, one with what I was doing. A loss of self-reflective consciousness, that the ego seems to disappear in these moments. There's no I. In moments of a merging of action with awareness, there's no room for ego as well. There's only body and world and goal, right? Maybe some style as well. For a sense that one was in control of one's actions, that in spite of there being no executive, I'm doing this feeling, right? Regardless of what may come, they would know what to do. The people engaging in flow with a lack of self-reflective consciousness, with action and awareness merged, wouldn't have the same kind of conscious experience of control, but would always be able to react appropriately. A distortion of time, so action's over, right? The first 30 seconds of the route, I black out, says Andra. So, like he starts the route and then it's 30 seconds later. It's actually 30 seconds later, but for him, it's a moment, right? An experience of intrinsic reward for the activity. So it didn't matter what you were doing, but when you did it in what was experienced as a flow state, it became intrinsically rewarding, right? So you could, we could take the Amazon warehouse worker as an example here and say, usually the job kind of sucks, but sometimes, you get in the zone. Sometimes it kind of works for you. Sometimes you really like packing boxes. It just clicks. And here in these moments, the activity can become intrinsically rewarding when it is experienced or performed as such. Okay, so how do they happen? The title of Csikszentmihalyi's dissertation on this that became a book in like 1981, I think. Might have been 70s, I'm not certain. It's called Between Boredom and Anxiety. And the idea is that when skill and challenge subjective to its performance, so again, we don't need to be experts to get into flow. We just need this balance for the individual performing between skill and challenge to be perfectly matched. So agents are more likely to report having been in a flow state if their level of skill matches the level of challenge asked for by the activity. So if you asked me to draw a blueprint for a building, I don't have those skills. It's a challenge beyond my capacity. And so I'm going to be anxious, especially if my life or job or well-being or whatever depend on it. I'm going to get real anxious and I won't be able to do it nearly as well. Similarly, if say I'm an expert architect, I've been in, say I'm like Frank Lloyd Wright, right? And you ask me to build a McDonald's, I'm Frank Lloyd Wright, and you've asked me to build a McDonald's, who the hell do you think you are, right? I'm gonna be bored and I won't get in the flow, right? As Frank Lloyd Wright here. Now, I could also be a total dingus, just like sitting down at a piano for the very first time and I play like do like one key at a time, but like be way into it, right? Because there I am, I'm doing it, and I'm not any good. I can't play, like for Elise or whatever, but I can do I can do the very simple ode to joy, and I might get into a flow state because the challenge of that particular set of notes matches my really poor skill, right? So we don't need to be experts, but what we do need is this match on the graph of skill to challenge. And again, even if there is a match, this doesn't it's not sufficient for being in a flow state, being sufficient for meaning that if you have this match of X and Y axis challenge and skill, then you'll be in a flow state. No, it's not logically necessitated, but this is where they tend to occur in the flow channel between anxiety and boredom. But this is probably too simplistic, and so it gets updated by Massimini, an Italian researcher, and his group of his lab group. They say, look, that this is too simple, particularly because boredom and anxiety aren't the only two emotions we feel when we're trying to do tasks. We also have apathy or worry, anxiety, arousal, control, and relaxation, right? There's a whole array of different emotions, all of which can still fit on this sort of XY axis graph. But we need to get a little more complex here with our understanding of what's going on. So this is like classic flow state theory. Any questions? What the heck you on about, Spencer?
Yeah, infinity implies that you can have infinite skill.
Yes. Yeah. Superman.
Yeah.
It's the most boring superhero. You can also have infinite challenge, which is far more frightening. Yeah. Okay. So what allows this state to occur in the right conditions, when the right conditions are met, Csikszentmihalyi and Nakamura argue that it's attention. That's what shifts us into the flow. Okay, so the distribution of attention is essential to entering into and sustaining a flow state. But attention, as we mentioned, is a limited resource, especially when we use it deliberately. Thinking like paying attention to this lecture as you get more and more tired and more bored, or hopefully not anxious, but you're using your attention, you're using it up. But when we're in the flow, the resource feeds itself. By attending wholly on the present, the feedback of success from our environment draws energy back into the system, giving us the fuel motivation to continue attending. And this kind of attention, this sort of motivation, is said to be effortless. And it's not effortless because it is easy, right? You say, like, wow, Messi just jumped, like 6 feet into the air to hit a header into the goal, and it looked so effortless. It was really hard, like jumping that high. It is a challenge, but it looks effortless because it has this elegance, this grace, and internally for Messi, it might feel effortless because of this intrinsic feedback of motivation into the attentional system to keep feeding and recharging that attentional battery. So flow states are associated with a lack of reflective self-consciousness. Then they must be intrinsically motivated, because you're only aware of action and world in this merged conscious state. You shouldn't be thinking about, oh, this is really good for me, because there's a lack of sense of ego. Similarly, you probably aren't thinking how much you're getting paid at the end of the game for playing the game. If you thought that sort of way, you'd probably be pretty distracted from playing, right? So the sort of motivation involved in flow is an activation of intrinsic motivation. Okay, so how is it possible that this intrinsic reward is able to motivate in the right sort of way if we're not in this state of like reflective self-consciousness, right? If we're not saying, hey, this is fun, I enjoy this, it's good for me. If we're not strictly speaking consciously present as executively functioning agents, at least in the classical sense of that sort of term, and in the way that you would think, I want to go to the store, so you go to the store, right? If we're not consciously present of that kind of voice, how does the intrinsic motivating feature of flow take grip and recharge that battery? Flow in the self. So this is a really important part of flow states, according to Csikszentmihalyi. And it's where we see some of the overlap in the cognitive science of flow and the positive psychology of flow. So the flow state is not just like a human factor studied and measured in cognitive psych labs. It's also a really important tool for positive psychology, which is the school of psychology that says, look, the best therapeutic method is not the one that feeds you all sorts of drugs to neurochemically balance you. You might need that as well. Nor is it the one that tells you to, every time you think X, and X is caused by trauma, think Y instead. So, and Y has no trauma involved, therefore you'll be better. This is cognitive behavioral therapy. Nor is it the sort where your therapist wants you to call them daddy and they tell you what all of your dreams mean. This is psychotherapy, right? Positive psychology says, look, we're not going to focus on trauma. We're going to focus on what you like about yourself and what's good, and talk about that and reinforce the positive behaviors and what's good. And in even behaviors that might be integrated with trauma. But if we focus only on what's good, then we reinforce those behaviors and those thoughts, and eventually they'll supersede the trauma and you get better. Now, choose if you're choosing the school of therapy that's best for you, because everything works differently for everybody. So, we each all have our own brains. But this is what the positive psychologists think. And this relationship between the cognitive science and therapeutic benefits of understanding flow sort of blend together in this more theoretical and conceptual section, right? And so as I read Csikszentmihalyi discussing the self and this like integration of action and world and the growth that eventually comes from it, which we'll talk about it. I see a whole lot of speculation, but I'm a philosopher of science, not a scientist, strictly speaking. And this is a place where Csikszentmihalyi is operating in the same sort of areas as a philosopher of science rather than as a scientist, strictly speaking. I think he's on to something, but I think this section is, at least in his own writing, often uncareful philosophically, but again, still very much onto something. So, as a caveat going forward. How do we make sense of one's experience of a lack of self, this lack of ego, this not mindlessness, but perfectly acute form of attention that recharges itself, right? Or the dilation of time, or the automatic and effortless production of action while in flow state. Do we become automata when we're in flow states? Right? If you're not thinking, here's what I should be doing, here's what I am doing. If you're not really thinking about yourself at all, you're just acting. Are we like robots when we're in the flow? No, shaking your head. Similar head shakes online. Maybe. Are the actions ours? So when I say I want to go to the store and I go to the store, I meant to do that. The Johnny Cash song, the Folsom Prison Blues, like you shoot a man just to watch him die, right? You decided to do that. And so you're totally responsible. What if you're, I don't know, like some sort of psycho killer and you shoot somebody in a rampage of, whatever, like you're out of your mind. You're in some sort of blood sport rage of flow experience. Do you share the same kind of responsibility because you didn't decide, strictly explicitly speaking, to commit that awful crime? Seems like, yeah, we should probably say that in the flow, these actions are owned by their performers. That there's a difference between going to the doctor and kicking your knee. You couldn't see that online. I hit my knee and right, which was not the way it works when you go to the doctor. That was all very deliberate. But that sort of automatic action that does not involve an intentional cause is a different sort than the kind of actions performed in the flow. But how do we make the distinction? Thoughts?
When you hit your knee, it's muscle reaction, and when you create something, you have to think.
Yeah, so there's a difference between behavior and creativity, right? That as we perform creative actions that are new in the world, even if it's the same thing, like hitting a header in soccer, it's the same thing, or even maybe even like shooting a free throw, right? In basketball. It's the same action over and over, but little shifts in like how tired you are, or in the case of the soccer ball, like where it's coming from. Every action is kind of unique, and so needs a little bit of creative power. And so that creative power at least tells us that there is some part of us active. Because the leg that kicks when it's hit by the doctor is not creative at all. And it's only reactive, right? It's not strictly active in its own sort of self-moved way. So good. Creativity is an important feature here. So as the story goes, as Csikszentmihalyi tells it, flow states are critical to healthy self-development. When we enter into a flow state, we return on the other side and recognize ourselves as having been capable of the action performed. We grow in confidence of our capabilities without an inflation of the ego. So how does this work? Well, imagine here's this big mountain. I think this is K2 in, I want to say K2 is in Iran. It's really dangerous, hard mountain to climb. Lots of people died doing it. And here's our mountain climber. One must imagine him happy. So as Csikszentmihalyi says, the self emerges when consciousness comes into existence and becomes aware of itself as information about the body, subjective states, past memories, and personal future. So when we are a self, says Csikszentmihalyi, we are aware of all sorts of information about what it's like for us to be what we are, to have this sort of like third personal gazing down and collective understanding of our phenomenological experience, historically speaking. But when we get in the flow, say like as you're, almost, yeah, there he goes. I made it to the top, good. So when we're in the flow, and back down to the bottom because that is his lot, we don't have this same sort of self-reflective consciousness, but we reach this point at which like our skill and our the challenge of the activity are perfectly met to sort of like delete all of the extra stuff. There's only what's needed to be done when you're climbing right at your limit. That's what it's called in climbing. The idea is that when you get to the top, your ego comes back, right? That like, oh, I did that. I'm the sort of person that's able to do that. And so you stretch the boundaries of your capacity into the new limits of this, the achievement of skill. Your limits are pushed out, right? Similar to what Bertrand Russell says of philosophical questioning, that as we engage in this contemplative practice, we expand the self. Similarly, in a more active, less contemplative sense, when you engage in flow, you expand the boundaries of your skills so that you become a little better at what you're doing and you become a little fuller as a person. You say, I did that. I'm able to do that. Now I can do a little bit better next time, right? Skip that question. So as the story continues, there's a certain sort of personality type for whom this kind of this generation of intrinsic motivation through flow-like activities, through our attentional powers to merge action and awareness, etc. There's a certain kind of personality for whom this is more likely to happen than not. Okay, so is the autotelic personality, meaning of its own or end goal. We've talked a lot about telic or telos, right, in the Aristotle lecture. So the autotelic person is a person who's intrinsically motivated to engage in activities. They're a person who generally enjoys doing things for their own sake rather than for some external goal. Autotelic persons are typically more active and receptive to new experiences. They're curious, they're open to challenges and ready to engage them. And being autotelic helps one enter into flow states more reliably, but entering into flow states also has this sort of recursive effect of generating a greater autotelic personality in people. The people who seek out flow states are ones who tend to become more autotelic in general. And this is why you have like Montessori schools and all sorts of interesting other practical upshots of positive psychology in the, say, like workplace and business place and stuff. So the distinctive feature of the autotelic person is that they are the sort of person who seeks out highly challenging actions that meet their skills in order to grow those skills so that they can continue to operate in the flow. Okay, so any questions so far? Autotelic personality, the expansion of self, flow and intrinsic motivation. Doing okay? Good. Okay. Do you think they're in the flow? Okay, so you don't have to, but has anybody experienced this themselves? And we have like a first personal report.
Like a feeling of,
Yeah. Have you been in the flow? And what was it like for you?
classes, art and piano. Like, I think my longest was going 3 or 4 days without a lot of eating or anything because I was painting a table. Like a cell in the lion.
Cool.
Yeah.
So has everything we've said been accurate to,
Yeah, pretty much.
yeah. Any differences, any like peculiar qualities?
I think like when I play piano, I feel it as like an extension of myself. Like, and that way it becomes kind of like what we were talking about. In some ways, you could say I'm not thinking because the piano is. It's hard to explain.
You mean the piano is thinking?
Well, it feels like I'm not playing the piano because the piano is part of me.
So what's happening?
I don't know.
Yeah, cool. So merging of action and awareness, the piano becomes a part of you, that hand and key and foot and pedal all just sort of become one system, right? Interesting. Anybody else? Have you been in the flow? What was it like? No.
So are you saying that you're in the flow state, like your brain just turned off?
No. Well, it's no, right? Because you're attending and you're working and you're able to be creative, right? But the phenomenology is right, like the piano and hand, they're the same, right? So reconciling the phenomenological reports with the both like neurocognitive effects and like just like looking at what happens in those actions, right? Is a problem, an interesting challenge. Jason says yes, but I don't think I have anything to add. So far we've described it. Good. Okay, so how about this then? Let's take a poll. And you're required to answer one way or the other. Okay, so expertise as just do it or cognition in action. We now have an example of what it's like to be performing optimally. And a whole lot of reports one way or another, and we might have a sense of what this is like because we've done it ourselves. Who thinks, given what we've now learned about the flow state, that expertise and optimal expert action is best characterized as just do it?
So you mean like flow states?
The mindless sort of just automatically like with the navigation thing in the map, right? Okay, who thinks it's more like cognition in action? Right. Okay, so that's pretty much everybody. So why do you think that the one is right and the other is wrong? ¿Por qué no los dos? Jason says, why not both? Who's these? Oh, no, I'm not. Whew. It's always disturbing is it's right for the emotion, but not for the act of not sneezing, you know? Anyways, what makes you think both, Jason? Oh, I can't hear you. Oh, well. All right, maybe next time. Okay, so interesting. Some issues, problems, and worries with flow states in general. What counts as a flow state? These are phenomenologically reported on experiences. They're fuzzy around the edges, and in fact, probably very fuzzy. But flow is good, right? And phenomenology is private. And there's a bunch of other worries about self-reporting. We have certain priorities in education and development. Do we educate to create autotelic students, or do we educate to imbue knowledge and make everybody a STEM master? Is it possible to do either of these things? So it counts as a flow state. Microflow, like, am I in a flow state when I tie my shoes? Am I in a flow state when I brush my teeth in the morning? And I don't know if I do this, but like when I'm taking a shower, I'm sure I like wash my body in mostly the same way every time, right? I don't think about it. I mean, if I get out of the shower, I'm clean. Are these like microflow moments? Do these count as flow states? These seems like very different kinds of activities than complex, like playing the piano or a sport, or like, coming up with chess tactics or whatever. These seem like very different kinds of flow, but they afford similar phenomenological qualities, right? This merging of action and awareness, loss of time, like all of a sudden I've been in the shower for 45 minutes. Do we get a kind of conceptual explosion when we begin to take the particular phenomenological properties of what's called a flow state and apply them to all sorts of other experiences that share similar phenomenological properties and say, well, that's flow too. Can we just call all sorts of things flow, and then we don't have any idea what the heck we're talking about anymore? And flow is good, isn't it? Or is it? You guys ever play World of Warcraft? This guy has. In fact, he's never done anything else. He and his Cheeto fingers play World of Warcraft all day, and surely he experiences flow states, right? Surely sits there 12 hours a day, and all of a sudden it's time to go back to sleep. I mean, I play video games myself. I played lots of World of Warcraft in my life, and know what this is like. So like I can get in a flow state playing video games, which is completely useless to pretty much everybody. But there I am feeling absolutely fine and dandy, killing boars in Elwyn Forest. Flow is good, right? You guys know this show? Dexter is a serial killer, but he's also a vigilante. He only kills bad people, like other murderers and child abusers and stuff. And what's excellent about the show, in one part that is excellent about the show, is the like montage scenes. He builds these kill rooms where like the walls are covered in saran wrap and pictures of the victims of the person he's about to murder. And he has like a table full of knives and saws that I don't even know if it's possible to imagine what they're all for. And as he's building this room, we get these like montages, these like scenes of pass through where it seems like the guy's probably in a flow state, right? Where the serial killer is just like in the zone, in his groove. He is living his absolute best life as his victim killer on the table to be murdered is about to not be living their life at all anymore, right? So we might say that flow state is something that can happen playing piano, World of Warcraft, or serial killing, vigilantism. So it's a kind of like optimal form of activity, but is it necessarily morally good? Well, no, right? And couldn't we say also that in cases in which an evil person gets in the flow state, are they optimally evil? Does this make them even worse? Right? Problems, interesting challenges. Phenomenology on the rocks and other self-reporting worries. We're terribly unreliable narrators of our own experience. We really have no idea what's going on in here. And this is why we need science to help us tell those stories. Cognitive penetration can become an issue. This is a terribly unfortunate term of jargon, but it is what it is. Cognitive penetration is the idea that personal level mental states, cognitive attitudes, certain bits of knowledge can penetrate or influence how we perceive the world. So for instance, two people are looking at a hill One of them has a 40-pound pack, the other does not. The one with the 40-pound pack will describe the hill as taller and steeper than the one without the pack. Okay, so they're looking at the same thing, and they may not have any idea that, you know, that they are experiencing the hill differently because they're experiencing the same hill. But the one with the pack thinks, damn, that's a long way I got to take this pack. But they don't think that explicitly. They just see it as taller. Another interesting study, this one was like, I don't know, 1940 or something. It might even be like in the late 1800s. Super famous study that they did on poor kids and rich kids, and then have them look at coins and then adjust an aperture in this box that would, you know, like an aperture like opens and closes to shine a light. And so they were supposed to look at the coin and then look in the box and adjust the aperture so that the like little dot of light would grow to the size of the coin. Okay. And the poor kids adjusted the aperture so the coin was way bigger. And the rich kids, I think it was either like the same size or smaller. Right. So like you interpret the money as bigger because it's more valuable to you, right? Sort of thing. Cognitive penetration. When we're talking about phenomenology, we can be mistaken both by our incapacity to like see inwardly, right? We're foggy mirrors to ourselves, but likewise, where things are clear, they're shifted around by the illusions and mirages of cognitively penetrated perceptual experience. And either we report as we act, causing strange, unnatural conditions, or we report after the fact, when we are no longer perfectly capable describers of our experience. So you can describe what's going on as you're doing it, which is a really weird way to do anything, right? I think the only profession in which this occurs naturally is teaching, right? I'm like talking about when I'm thinking literally as I'm doing it. This is all stream of consciousness. Or alternatively, we can report on what it's like to do as we do after the fact. We can perform the action and then stop and then think about it later, but then we're not in it anymore. We're not feeling those feelings. We're not having the experience anymore. We're reflecting, right? Which is probably valuable and healthy and good in its own right. But is it as accurate as we'd hope it would be for calculating phenomenon like flow? And our memories are awful and become worse the more we look back on them. This is another interesting reason why testimony, eyewitness testimony in the courtroom is troubling and problematic. So interesting, like philosophy of law problems. But the more you remember something, the more like little details get switched around and it can be completely different from what actually happened. Likewise, if you like forget about something for dozens of years and then like it pops in your head and you'll like recall it perfectly, or if you do recall it perfectly, then the details haven't been shifted. It'll be accurate, right? Perfectly accurate. May not be complete, but accurate. So our memories are awful and they shift one way or another. Okay, so priorities in education and development. Should we care about flow, and how do we care about it? Montessori schools are these really cool, interesting school curricula where you get kids of all ages together in a room and they kind of just decide what they want to learn when they want to learn it and how they want to learn it, how this class's syllabus is set up. So do we educate to create autotelic students, or do we educate to imbue knowledge? Can we prioritize proper behavior, or can we prioritize a proper education, right? So in education, can we try to focus on creating autotelic personalities and create a better world for ourselves? Because these autotelic people will just seek out the things that they love to do and they'll do them much better, even if it's, you know, like Dexter-like vigilante serial killing. Or are we better off just sort of like forcing a set of knowledge on people, core curricula, and, you know, making sure that, you know, PEMDAS and the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Right. So if flow states are value neutral, then is producing a flowy population, autotelic population, really actually good for that population? It's a big old mystery. Right? I think that it depends. So I facetiously coughed and said the syllabus, like I've designed this class and all of the classes that I teach to be Montessori-like in a collegiate university setting. My goal is for you all as students to be inspired and do inspired work as the inspiration strikes, not to be forced one way or another. Now, if I were teaching a logic class or a STEM class, I wouldn't be able to do this. If I wanted you to be a doctor, I wouldn't care if you got into the flow. I would care that you knew what, like the vascular system was made of, because that's what doctors need to know in order to operate on vascular systems. In a humanities philosophy setting, those boundaries can shift. It doesn't really matter what you're able to say, what Kant said about synthetic a priori judgments. I mean, that may be helpful, not really, probably, but what matters is that you've asked the questions and you've done this like Russell expansion of the self. If you forget, the influence is still there, right? The recognition of the power of inspiration and your capacity for it lives on. And so I think that we should bring philosophy into education, like lower education, right? In order to give both the mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell kind of knowledge and this experience of Montessori flow, like autotelic generation. Okay, so before we close out, we'll do a group activity. So we're going to get together in groups and ask ourselves, what is an activity or strategy that could be used in university classes to incorporate flow into the lesson plan? What would be some hangups to your proposal? How would you sell it anyways? Or you can argue why we shouldn't engage in flow activities in the classroom. We should be doing something else. And the class is over, so I can't make that promise. But I'm going to put you guys in breakout rooms, and we'll do 2 breakout rooms of 4 people each. So let me just pause the recording real quick. Okay, so discussion just ended. Thanks everybody for taking part. For all of you in the future watching this on YouTube or Zoom or whatever, that's the end. So again, this is like our last actual lecture. Thanks for taking part, everybody who did. Enjoy your holidays. Have a good Thanksgiving. Remember, be kind and compassionate to your family, and it matters more that you're able to like love each other and be together than that you're right. So, remember that as you have your inevitable political disagreements and whatnot, and that, good food trumps all. Next week we'll do the movie night thing. So lecture will begin at 6:30, and it's not a lecture. What we're just going to do is have like a discussion. So I'll post a link to the movie so that everybody can watch it either in their own time or come to class. And I'll set it up on the big TV, and I'll bring popcorn and candy and some soda and stuff so that we can have a movie night. And the movie is called Being in the World, and it's all about this stuff. So it's all about expertise and flow and how we should think of like action and what it's like to just be at all from a certain perspective. So we'll discuss that perspective, especially, I expect it to be especially interesting given all of your now intuitions that expertise is all about cognition and action, because the movie takes the alternative perspective. Cool. Okay, so until 6:30, or come at 5 like you normally do if you want to watch the movie in person. So the movie will start, strictly speaking, or promptly, I should say, at 5, and then 6:30 will be the discussion, and we'll do that for, I don't know, like an hour or whatever. And attendance, if you come for the discussion, even if you're just there for a few minutes, that's fine. Just taking part. Okay, so see you next week.